So I went on Frank Morano, The Other Side of Midnight on WABC, which I have done before. It's been a long time, and this is actually way better. I don't really know. Yeah, I don't really know. I have a good grip on like who the listener base is because it's New York City talk radio, but on the other hand, it's the show is from like 1 to 3 in the morning New York time. But at least now that I'm on the West Coast, that's a much gentler time frame, to be a guest on the show than it used to be. But yeah, let's maybe skip to the part where he starts asking me about the Palestine stuff.
All right. I want to go through a few items that have been in the news, sort of. We'll get to as many as we can here. You have written a great deal about the war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. I like a lot of progressives, my impression in your writing is that you think Israel is not behaving appropriately, and it's also inappropriate for the United States to be aiding Israel. Do I have your position down accurately?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think that this is, I think that the carnage going on in Gaza right now is kind of has reached some pretty unspeakable levels. You have 1.9 million out of 2.3 million civilians who live in Gaza who've been displaced from their homes. There's really been a systematic destruction of Palestinian, like the sort of conditions for normal Palestinian society, going back to what it was in Gaza before this started. And I would also say that if you look at the history of our country's wars in the Middle East after 9/11, the idea that the effect of this is just going to be that there's no more Hamas or no equivalent of Hamas, that that there won't be more terrorism, doesn't seem very likely to me. I mean, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan destroying the Taliban, and I think we saw how that went. I see very little reason to think that this is going to play out in a better way, especially because I think most human beings, if they see their brothers and sisters, parents, cousins killed, are not going to respond in the way that that would be hoped for by the military that's doing this stuff. I think that this is the kind of thing that would lead a lot of people to go out and join terrorist organizations in much the same way that many Israelis understandably might have wanted to join the IDF to get some kind of vengeance after October 7th.
Sure. That makes sense to me. And I don't want to focus too much on the policy here because I have a longstanding rule of not debating people that are significantly smarter than me. And unfortunately, you fall into that category. And I do want to ask you about the politics, but just on the policy, you have a lot of people listening to this, and there's two questions, even folks that haven't necessarily followed every step of this war. And there's two questions that really stick out. One is, if there's a ceasefire or an end to Israeli hostilities, how does Israel get all of their hostages back? That's question one. And two, if there's a ceasefire, how can Israel and the United States, by extension, be assured that Hamas won't just regroup and try something similar like this in the future?
Sure. So I would say on the first question that the best shot for getting all of the hostages back safely would be as part of the negotiations for a permanent ceasefire. That, in fact, there are at least a few cases of Israeli hostages who have been killed by the IDF that we're sure of, because if you're engaged in this indiscriminate siege, that's bound to happen. And I would be very unsurprised if there later turned out to be other cases that we don't know about. And in fact, I think that if you are going in, guns blazing, I think that is the kind of thing that really endangers the lives of hostages, which is why, in fact, even as Israeli politics has become, don't get me wrong. I'm very aware that the vast majority of that country supports the war, but but really some of the only voices of opposition have come from families of hostages for exactly that reason. And I think that if you had like a real long-term ceasefire, not a 6-week pause, and then we're going to go right back to doing what we're doing. And, oh, by the way, those million people aren't allowed to return to northern Gaza while it's happening. But like a real permanent ceasefire, I think that's the best chance of saving those people's lives. And as far as the idea of something like this happening again, I would just question the idea that you're going to prevent something like this from ever happening again by, again, displacing millions of Palestinians, killing tens of thousands of Palestinian children, et cetera. I think all of that stuff could actually supercharge future recruitment to Hamas or some successor organization in the future. I think as far as ending the cycle of violence, because you're right, if you don't change anything, there's every chance that, right, there will be future outbreaks of violence, of course. But I think as far as ending this cycle of violence in the long term, I think the only way that could ever happen is if there's some kind of permanent settlement so it's no longer the case that you have all of these millions of Palestinians who are living as stateless, non-citizen subjects of Israel. I think that's the only way you could calm that down in the long term.
Yeah, it was a little bit hard for me to tell actually, what his own view on this is. I think he might not have actually completely disagreed with all this. Like it might have just, a lot of this might have just been kind of like, here are the questions his audience expects him to ask, and so he's just gonna kind of run through them, but yeah, I mean, this is, I don't know, I guess this is my best attempt at sort of like, what's the, what's my like relatively normie friendly attempt to sort of say, here's why, even on their own terms, right, none of the justifications for this, make any sense, and, and it really needs to stop.
Yeah, I think that's a good rhetorical strategy to get people in the middle. And I also have to say, I kind of like his. He says, "You're smarter than me. I'm gonna listen." I guess if there was a smart Zionist, he would just sit back and listen. But he also kind of has that like kind of an old-fashioned radio voice. You know what I mean? Like it was nice to listen to in an age of just like Twitch streaming and stuff like that.
Fair enough. Well, we do have a little bit more on this part.
So, Ben, I mean, a lot of, and we're talking with Ben Burgis. You could check out his columns and his book and find him on Twitter. A lot of interesting things all around. Ben, how can Israel live peacefully with the Palestinians in the future, especially with Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip, when Hamas has indicated that they view October 7th as the beginning of many more such attacks, and the charter of Hamas is obviously, deeply anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. How do you live side by side with that situation?
Yeah, so I would say, two things. One is as far as Hamas goes, that even Hamas has said, I think back in 2017, if I've got that right, that despite what the original charter says, that they would be willing to, for the sake of national unity, accept a two-state settlement, even though they don't think they should have to. And so, if people are going to bring up the original charter, I think they should also talk about that. But I think more importantly, the question is, well, look, Hamas is awful. You're certainly not going to get an argument from me about that, right? I have no
sure.
For many obvious reasons, right? Hamas is awful. But the question is, how is it that there are this many people who are willing to sign up for an organization like Hamas, that they have been willing to exert this level of power for so long, and I think that's inseparable from the Israeli occupation, from the human rights abuses that happen. I mean, that's why you get this pool of people who have become willing to support that. And I think the only way to undercut that in the long term is to change the conditions that give rise to it. And one last point about this, I would also say that, we're used to, when you ask questions like that, we're used to thinking about it in those terms, because we're used to thinking about, seeing ourselves in the Israelis for all sorts of cultural and historical reasons. But I would point out that you could ask all the same questions with at least equal force in the other direction. So on October 7th, there were 1,200 Israelis who were killed. I think the current Israeli estimate is about 695 of them were civilians, which is awful. But in the 6 months since then, you have had 33,000 Palestinians killed, the overwhelming majority of whom are women and children. And so you could equally say the ruling party of Israel, Likud, says in its equivalent of an original charter, right? Its original charter as a party, that they think that Israel should permanently control everything from the river to the sea. And so if you combine that with what they've actually been doing in the last 6 months, you could equally ask, well, how could the Palestinians be expected to peacefully live side by side with people who've done that to them?
Ben,
and ultimately, I hope people can live side by side, because the only other option is this forever.
I don't know. I mean, it's always a little bit of other people's experience may differ, like I always feel like I'm a little bit unsure about how much to, how to sort of balance making the basic point that I want to with all right, what's the, it's like you're not going to get people on everything in one conversation. So it's like, what's the, I'm not going to sort of do my, you should have a single state, solution with right of return and all that stuff. And that, that context, because that feels like that's going to be about another hour of conversation. But at least say, look, you got to do something, right? Or else whatever is politically or practically possible at any point in the future, whatever. It's look, if you oppress people in this violent and brutal a way for this long, right? I mean, this is you're going to get the idea that there's such a thing as it's a peaceful occupation, that that you're just gonna kill so many people that they'll just agree that you can just that you could just occupy them forever, and and they'll stop they'll stop shooting in the direction. Just seems completely delusional to me. And I think that even if you don't accept any sort of larger critique I might have of Zionism, it just seems like that much feels like it should be common sense.
It's not that far off from Martin Luther King's speech from, I believe, Stanford, if I remember correctly. But he was discussing riots, and he basically said that, you shouldn't be angry at the riot itself. You don't have to agree with the actions, but you should be angry at the conditions that caused people to feel that was the justifiable actions to do. And that's
I mean,
I try to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think King's point was obviously he didn't agree with the riots, but he he thought that their riots were sort of a second order issue, right? That they have the sort of first order issue is the conditions that give rise to it, right? And I think that it's not a question of obviously as a secular socialist, atheist, part Jewish, etc., right? For many reasons, right? Hamas is not, let's put it this way: they would not have my vote if I got to vote in Palestinian elections. But the
PLO to the polls.
It's a deep cut.
I stole that from Forrest, by the way.
I would, I don't know. I have I guess out of the options available, I'd seriously consider casting my vote for the, the sort of as sort of weird and Stalinist as they are for, the PFLP. That seems like maybe the best option on there. But
I wrote in Dick Cheney when I voted in that election.
Yeah. So it's like, they're for many, many obvious reasons, right? Not my favorite people, but like, the question is just like, why should you think that if you could do, if you continue the conditions that have given rise to this, in fact, you make those conditions much, much worse. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.